Karl Rove with us right now. Karl, I can't imagine the timing of this being any more problematic for the president, just as he is trying to get past all of this, call himself the law and order president, and then all of a sudden bemoan the loss of the Confederate flag. Passions be damned in the South, and particularly among NASCAR fans. What do you make of it all?
I make it as a central question of the president's reelection. Is he going to show some discipline? This day could have been devoted to following on his July 4th speech. He could have, for example, mentioned Senator Duckworth, who yesterday on one of the Sunday Talk programs, a prospective Democratic vice presidential nominee, suggested that she was open to the idea of removing statues of George Washington. He could have talked about Christopher Columbus and how these statues of Columbus were being destroyed by mobs in Baltimore and elsewhere. Those would have been things that would have furthered what he said on Saturday. But instead, we have him taking on the only African-American driver in NASCAR and seeming to support the retention of the Confederate flag. Even Mississippi last week became the last state in the Union to remove the Confederate flag from its state flag, and did so by an overwhelming vote in its legislature and a quick signature by the governor. So what the president was doing today is beyond me. It was not advancing his cause. He has 120 some odd days between now and the election, and what he tweets is going to determine what the message is of that day, and that message is going to determine whether he advances his cause or hurts his cause. And I think today he hurt his cause with his tweet about Bubba Wallace and the Confederate flag.
You know, Karl, Lindsey Graham was on my colleague Brian Kilmeade's radio show, and he said that they're saying of NASCAR and removing the Confederate flag, they're trying to grow the sport. If you're in the business, the Confederate flag is not a good way to grow your business. Now, whatever people's views on this subject, I'm not trying to weigh into it here. I am wondering about whether it's appealing to his base and satisfying his base, although you even imagine among that base, this might be deemed offensive. I'm just wondering, back to the argument for re-election, is his base alone enough to give him a victory?
There's never been a president who got reelected whose base alone was sufficient to win. You had to, whether it's FDR in 1936 taking traditionally Republican states, whether it is Richard Nixon in 1972 winning traditionally Democratic states, you win re-election as president not by simply appealing to the people that got you there in the first place, because by and large what happens with those people is most of them stick with you, but enough of them flake off of you because of disappointment that you can't win by them alone. You need to grow your universe. And look, the president has Bubba. Bubba is strongly in the president's camp. Bubba ain't going to be going away. What the president needs to be worried about are suburbanites, particularly suburban women, and he needs to be worried about his vote among the African-American and Latino communities, which he has the capacity to grow because of what he has done on the economy. And the thing that will cause him to lose support in those communities is if he seems to be taking on a popular figure in those communities for no good reason. And what's going to hurt him in reaching the suburban voters is if he doesn't seem to get that there are things that people are concerned about, and they're not the Confederate flag and an African-American driver in NASCAR. And equating, with all due respect to the new White House press secretary, I hope she does not compare Jesse Smollett, who went out and deliberately and methodically prepared an attempt to rescue his career by making himself into a victim, and Bubba Wallace, who said, my crew found what looks like to be a noose in my work area, and I'm concerned about it. They're entirely different situations.
Yeah, I hear you're right about that. Let me get your thoughts, meanwhile, on this latest development over the weekend that Kanye West is entertaining a run for the White House. And I was waiting for tweets from the president or those who support him to raise concerns. And when I didn't, I'm thinking maybe they argue it's in the president's interest to see if Kanye divides the minority vote. Or anyway, what do you think?
I think it's even more elemental than that. They know it is a fantastic, absolutely irresistible idea for Kanye West to run for president, but it's implausible. He can't be on the ballot in Texas. You already had to file. He can't be on the ballots in half a dozen other major states. If he tried to run as an independent candidate for president, I bet you a dime to a dollar he doesn't get in on even a quarter of the states in the union, and as a result can't be a credible candidate. This is Kanye thinking that sending out a tweet is the same as getting on the ballots and setting up a campaign. It is just a laughable fantasy. I mean, it's just a joke. I'm glad the president didn't tweet about it because he has nothing to worry about. Kanye West is not going to be on the ballots of major American states. In fact, I bet you a dime to a dollar he doesn't get on one state's ballot. So forget about it. Spend your time and energy and effort and focus on something else.
What if the Libertarians wanted to switch gears and make him their nominee, be on all 50 state ballots, right?
Look, the Libertarians do crazy things, but they're not even that crazy. No, they're not going to be doing that. I mean, please. I mean, the Libertarians are going to say, what do you think of Hayek's thesis on this? And what do you think about von Mises' book on that? And Kanye is not deeply deeply read in the libertarian literature. He's not going to be significantly seriously libertarian enough for them to nominate him.
Do you think the president will have a tough time with the African-American vote? I mean, he argued prior to the virus, Karl, that he had made tremendous inroads for African-Americans, both in employment levels, job gains, salary gains. How do you think he'd do this time versus last time?
Well, look, last time he got roughly 8%, which is frankly what most Republicans get. But yes, before this coronavirus came on, it was looking like, particularly among younger African-American men, that he had some real opportunities there. I think those opportunities are going to come back as the economy comes back and as the campaign heats up. And I think the president, if he does things correctly, has the capacity to move his vote among the African-American community from 8 to 10 to 12 to 13 or 14. Now, that may not seem like much, but think about this. Think about Michigan, which he won by 11,000 votes. What happens if his support in the African-American community goes from 8% to 10 or 12%? That means that his margin conceivably could be 2 or 3 times that. What happens in Wisconsin, which he won by 25,000 votes? 35,000 fewer African-American voters voted in the city of Milwaukee than voted 4 years previously. What happens if the president's able to get his number up even minimally? You saw this in Ohio in 2004. George W. Bush got 8% of the African-American vote in 2000. He got 13% in 2004. And in battleground states like Florida and Ohio, he got 16% of the African-American vote. That's huge impact on the bottom line, which is why Ohio was not close in 2000 and not as close in 2004 as it had been in 2000. And Florida was significantly better for the president in 2004 than it had been in 2000. Same thing could happen for President Trump, but he's got to stay focused on what moves those voters in his direction. And again, back to where we started, it ain't going after Bubba Wallace, and it ain't going in defense of the Confederate flag.